What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over a mini-map in our third-person tutorial / action RPG series. So this method that I'll be using is a simple method for a mini-map, and it is essentially the best method that I'm aware of. We use it all the time. I've used it when I was going through school. We used a similar method at one of my projects at the old place that I worked. We even are using it on a current project that we're working on the side. So I figured I'd show you guys how to do it because it's pretty cool, and like I said, this is a pretty good method. I think the majority of people implement this sort of thing when using a mini-map when going for this simple top-down view. There are ways to customize it and make everything look different, so we can add other symbols to the mini-map. Looking at other games, you can see that, you know, this might have an icon as opposed to just being a dagger. And these guys would probably have red cursors or red arrows as enemies. And we'll be going over that as well. But we're going to skip that for today. That'll be in the next episode. We're going to just focus on all the functionality for this minimap and how we can get it to look exactly how we want. Cool. It's actually all going to be in blueprints because we're mainly going to be handling all this with cameras and widgets. If you want to get caught up in the series to this point, that way you know how we got here and how we did everything that you see, feel free to click this icon in the top right corner. That's the entire playlist for the third-person tutorial series. Otherwise, you can click this right here, which is just all the logic we have for our quest system, which I think is very important in regards to our mini-map. Even though we're not using it today, we'll be able to put quest objectives and markers on our mini-map and on our actual map so that you can see where you have to go, and the player can see where they have to go to turn in a quest, or maybe perhaps where they need to go to continue the quest. So yeah. Alright, so let's get started. We're going to need our base character BP. So basically our character that we're going to be playing as. We have to set up a few additional components on the character before we can actually implement any of the render target stuff to display it to the HUD. So when we're in our character, what we need to do is set up another view that can act as our mini-map. You can see as I move the character, the cursor moves. And this is because it's actually following the character from the top-down perspective. This is really the same as playing like a top-down game, except it's that small widget in the top right corner as opposed to the full screen. So you can see I'm playing, or it looks like I'm playing the top-down screen in the top right. We don't have any special effects to do that. We just literally add a camera that's going to have that rotation. Okay. So let's go ahead and scroll down and see what I got here. I have a spring arm, scene capture component 2D, and then we're going to have a sprite. That way we can display the user as this image as opposed to themselves. So first things first, we have the spring arm. The spring arm is basically going to be the thing that's attached to the character, and then the scene component 2D, the scene capture component 2D, excuse me, is what's going to handle the actual capturing of the view. That way we can use it to display to the widget. So to accomplish this, we're going to add a spring arm, add component, spring arm, click it, and you can read the comment here if you want, but like I said, this is basically to keep the camera in place. So if we go to our class defaults here, you can see the settings on the spring arm, and you can see everything we have selected. So I've been playing around with these options quite a bit because I'm curious on what looks the best, and I think for the best results you're going to want to leave all these camera settings unchecked here. For inherit pitch, inherit yaw, inherit roll. Use pawn control rotation won't really matter here if it's checked on its own, since we have the scene capture component 2D just facing this way regardless. However, it's unchecked by default. These are checked by default. Let me show you what it looks like if these are checked. If these are checked, then the camera rotates as well as the cursor, but really the world is rotating around it, is how it looks. You see that? So this is fine if this is what you want. You may want this effect. Now most games I know, and I was thinking of Yakuza as a good example, but a lot of RPG games have this mechanic. they should look like this, where the cursor actually rotates. The world does not rotate around you, but the cursor or the player indicator here rotates around the world. That way the world is not constantly changing, but the direction that the player interaction object here, the cursor, is. So you can see as I turn, the player icon in the minimap also turns, but the world stays the same orientation. This allows us to, not get lost as easily. This is not always moving around, so which way is north, which way is south? We literally are just having the camera always face that direction, and then based on what way the player rotates or the enemies rotate, then we can show what direction they're facing. So I think that these are the best settings for the camera, but it's not required. You could leave these checked and allow the world to be the thing that rotates. Up to you. Depends on your preference. And I haven't set up anything else in the spring arm. See all my settings there. Do make sure that your spring arm is facing basically vertically from the center of your character. For me, when I started, the spring arm was actually, of course, at 0, 0, 0. Is basically the angle, the rotation on the X, Y, and Z where the initial camera is here. But we want this one to be above us like the top down. So like I said, you're going to want to rotate this. You can either just manually move it or rotate it, or we know that 270 degrees is this value because of Unreal's rotation coordinate system. If you do 90, it's going to go below the character. But we don't want to really see below the character. You can see we're looking like under the map. Instead, we want to be above the character, which would be 270. Okay. Cool. So with that done, we need to also actually attach something to the spring arm. We're going to add a scene capture component 2D. So I recommend just clicking on the spring arm, clicking add component, scene capture component 2D. Click this guy. It will automatically become a child. However, if it's not, you can just drag it directly onto the spring arm and it will attach it as a child. Now, this camera, the scene capture component 2D, will always be attached to the spring arm and where the spring arm is. Since the spring arm isn't inheriting the pitch, yaw, or roll, it's not going to be rotating with the character, which allows it to be independent from the character, which is why the character can rotate here on the minimap, because the spring arm is stuck in place while the character rotates. Okay, now on the scene capture component 2D, there's something that we can set that gives it this mini-map feel. When you first start out, this is how your scene capture component 2D will look, minus this object. You won't have this texture target. But everything else, you can see I haven't changed anything else, it will look like this. And this looks kind of cool. I mean, the cursor's way too close at this point. In fact, let's actually hide this so I can make my point. Okay, so this looks kind of cool, right? You can see that it's actually got the depth here by default, because it is a camera after all. However, in the minimap, a lot of times you won't have this depth. You might have a little bit of it, or you might have like shadows or indicators of it, but you usually don't show everything actually as shown here. It's usually flat. Well, the way that's handled is by switching the scene capture component 2D projection type from perspective to orthographic. It doesn't have a comment here, but orthographic basically just means that it is going to always show it as perpendicular. And so it's always going to show it at a 90-degree angle, which means that it will basically look at as though it's flat. You can still get an idea of, where there are inclines and things, because we have shadows, so if you keep that rendered, it will be. We'll probably end up taking that out as we go farther into the minimap episodes. But you can tell for now using that. You can also tell just because you can see that a structure is sitting on another structure. Like here, we have our ground, and then we have stairs. Even if you couldn't really tell those were stairs, you can tell that there is an object sitting on top of this object. So you can kind of tell. It's not to say that it's not tricky. Usually what happens is if the developers want to indicate that there are stairs here, we'll have someone design or create a stair logo or icon that then goes on the minimap. Okay. So orthographic is the way to go here, in my opinion. You can also change the ortho width if you want. 512 is the default, and that shows you how much of the minimap you can really see. Let me re-enable visibility on my cursor here, because that is going to come into play. So this is what it looks like by default for me, and this is 512. If I make this larger, I can make this 2000. I haven't played around with this value much, so I don't know. So 2000 is probably way too far away, but you can see I can see a lot more of my minimap. Maybe I want 100. That's going to be incredibly close. Maybe I want 950. That's still a little far away. Maybe I want like 800. But yeah, something like this could work. So you can change the size of the, basically how far you can see, how much you can see of the minimap by changing this ortho width. I actually kind of like the default. I might zoom it out a little bit, like maybe 600. I think that looks pretty good for a minimap for now. It's very zoomed in, so if we're looking on like a world scale, we're definitely going to want to increase this. But for now, for the small little level we're in here, I think this is perfectly fine. All right. Now, there's a few other things we can do here in the scene capture component. Let's add the sprite first. Once we add the sprite, I will then go over some of the other things you can do with this, such as getting rid of the actual character from being visible to this component. That way you can't see your player. Usually you can't see your player in maps or mini maps. Instead, you'll see the player icon. So for this, what we're going to need is we're going to need our sprite for our cursor. Now, you could use just a regular material or texture, but we're going to have to convert it to a sprite because we need to attach it to our character. That way it follows the orientation, rotation of the character, and it also wants to be shown by the scene capture component. When we get into the more advanced minimap logic, we'll be able to tag all of the actors on the minimap and display an icon for them. So it's not required that you have this sprite directly here in front of the camera. However, this is one way that you could do it, and it will always work. It's just a little bit extra work when you have to access other objects and get their icons. But anyway, without any more confusion, what we need to do is go into our, where we created our icon. You need to have an icon for your player. I have an enemy as well, but mainly I made this minimap player icon and imported it. Literally, this is a PNG image, and what I did is I just brought it into my directory here at this file location, and automatically allowed it to import. But you can also add import and add in a specific asset, add in your PNG here. Once you add in your PNG, then you'll have this texture. That's what it displays as, and this is what it is going to look like. You don't have to change anything on here. But if you see that, you know you've done it correctly. You can right click on it and create, go to Sprite Actions, create Sprite. This will allow you to make it basically a paper 2D element, which if you're not familiar is Unreal Engine's Sprite version, I guess. It's the thing that allows sprites and flipbooks to be used as opposed to models. They call them sprites, flipbooks, and paper 2D. Nothing here is super important either. I mean, feel free to play around with this. There's plenty that you can do, but we don't actually need to do anything with it here. We just need to make sure that we make this sprite. Because now on our character, we can go click on either your base character BP or just your capsule component. We don't want it to be a child of the spring arm. You can see it's not. If it is, it won't rotate with the character. It'll do what the scene capture component 2D is doing, which is not rotating, and we need it to rotate with our character as it rotates. So we don't want it to be attached to the spring arm. So click on your capsule component, add component. You can do sprite. Paper sprite is what you want. If you don't have one, it'll allow you to put one in without the name here. But since I only have this one sprite, it actually allows me to just manually select this version. So paper sprite with minimap player icon sprite. Click that, or click the regular paper sprite. And once you go into your object here, you can then choose your source sprite if you want to change it. Okay, and then I've changed the location to a value that I like. I did manually just drag this in and just put it here. You could move it wherever you want and change the scale to make it look how you want on your mini map. That's entirely up to you. I just gave these values because I know 270 for the rotation of the spring arm is what we want. The scene capture component, I didn't change any. And then the mini map with this scale and this location, I decided that I liked how it looked. But there's really no reason that I put them at any of these spots. Just make sure that it is rotated and facing the correct orientation. It should be lining up with the way your player is facing at the start. Okay, and then you should choose owner no C here. Okay, so in your class defaults for this sprite, if you scroll down to the rendering section, you should choose owner no C and toggle it on, because this is the default. And let me show you what it looks like. I can actually see the player icon above me, which is kind of cool. You can see what it's doing. Even if you're not looking at the mini map, you can see that it is following the character, and it's pretty cool that it's there and all. But really, that's not what we want. We don't want this to be anything that can be seen by the player. Really, we don't want it to be seen by anyone. We only want it to be seen on the minimap. But since we don't have any other icons here, we just want to basically ignore it from being seen by the player to start. We'll have to ignore everyone else for everyone else later. Okay? And once you do that, you'll be able to see that this is starting to come together. You still won't be able to see your minimap or anything because we haven't made that. I'm just showing you as I go what these changes are doing. And now if we go into our scene capture component 2D, there's one other thing I want to show you. So we're going to have to set up the scene capture here. So this is the scene capture component 2D. We set up the orthographic and our ortho width. And now we have the scene capture section where we have this texture target. You won't have anything in here by default. And so that will be an issue because we need to know what we're going to display using the render target and what we want to show on the minimap. Okay, so let's go to somewhere where you can create a new object that you'll know where it's at. And you want to make a new render target. So we're going to add and import materials and textures, canvas render target right here. We have used render targets in other sections, so you may be familiar with them. But basically what this is this is going to be, once you create this, just rename it to Minimap. I call it Minimap render target. I didn't change any of the values of it. These are all the defaults. And I have this guy here. Now, what this is this is essentially an output that is, it takes something, some form of capture and displays it here. A lot of times if you see TVs or monitors in games, they're using render targets. There's a camera that is, tracking it's recording a camera somewhere in a scene and basically transmitting that data to this render target. And that's what we're going to do here. So we go to our base character BP. Now that we have this render target made, minimap render target, you want to select a texture target of that render target. What this will actually do, the way this works, is this scene capture component 2D, what it can see, then sends it to this render target. So once you assign that to the scene capture component, you should see that maybe this has the cursor in the middle like mine does. However, we don't want to put the render target directly on a widget, so we need to make a material out of it, and we're going to display the material to our HUD. So you can right click on the render target and hit create material. You'll see that the material is actually, it actually changes as well with the render target. And just to show you how this works, just in case you don't believe me, you think I'm lying, if I change the sprite color, I can change it to, see, I made the icon pink or purple now. If I compile and save this, you can see that now the material and the render target both show it as a pink sprite. And now it's pink in the game. Okay, so these directly coincide with what the Scene Capture Component 2D is seeing. Now, go into this material, double click it, go into it. You will have some stuff in here that will be linked up, and the material domain will be surface. Well, first thing you want to do is switch the material domain to be user interface, because we're going to be displaying it on our widget, on our HUD, so the player can see the minimap. Once you do set the user interface here, make sure that you do also reconnect RGB to final color. Sometimes this gets disconnected, not always, but I've seen it get disconnected when switching the material domain because the actual link was broken. And when you do that, then that can, it won't display anything. So make sure you're still seeing something here. You can save or apply to make sure that you're seeing the up-to-date changes. You can see I don't change anything else in here, but on the actual texture sample itself, if you click on this, you get new stuff on here. Just make sure that the texture is set up to be the minimap texture. It will be, but just so you're aware of how this works, essentially this texture sample is grabbing the minimap render target, taking the colors from it, and setting it to be the final color on this material. So as it changes, the material changes. Okay? And so now we have to get this on our HUD. So I have a character HUD where I have quest info and experience, health, mana, and level. And then now you can see I have a minimap here. Now the way you get this on your HUD is pretty simple. We're actually just going to go into common or search for image, drag the image onto the screen, literally drag it, and just make sure it's in your basic canvas. Doesn't have to be parented or in any sort of hierarchy. I called it minimap, and all I did was I set it where I wanted it in the game. At the appearance section here, I've set the image to be the material, the minimap render target material. Not just the render target, but the material. Okay, everything else, as usual, is the same. But now you should see, even in this preview here, that this material is being displayed on the HUD. That's why we had to make it a user interface material earlier. And so now we can actually walk around, and you should be able to see it on your HUD now. It won't look the same as how I see it, but if done correctly, you should be able to see it now, and it's pretty cool. But let's go back to our base character for a second, because let me show you what you probably see if you haven't made any other additional changes. So if on scene capture here, there is a down arrow to show advanced, click that, and you have a bunch of settings for what you can show and what you don't want to show. By default, everything's checked, so you're going to see the skeletal meshes. Now this is cool for something like the pumpkin golems, you can see them there. However, I don't want to see my own character here. I want to see the player icon on the minimap. And for other enemies, we also probably won't want to see the actual pumpkin golem, even though it's cool for now. We probably want to see an enemy icon. So something we can get rid of is the skeletal meshes section. We can get rid of a few other things as well, like static meshes. However, when you get rid of static meshes, take note that your static mesh for all your armor, helmets, weapons, and the actual stage itself, they're all static meshes. So if you do that, you won't be able to see your ground or anything. Something that I do recommend getting rid of at the moment is the render 3D text, because that gets rid of like this right here, the third person. I don't think that needs to be displayed. If you do have text like this in your game, it's probably for a tutorial or template reason. I don't expect that you would actually want this to be shown on the minimap, but it's up to you. Very, very simple to change back and forth. So feel free to play around with these and only set things that you want. We are going to be doing more advanced episodes, as I mentioned, so you'll see other methods of setting these things to be visible to certain players, and what shows up and what doesn't. So don't worry about it too much for now, but you can play around with it if you want to see fun stuff. Just so you're aware, it's in the general show flags and the advanced show flags categories. And again, it's in the advanced settings of the scene capture. So there's a lot of stuff you have to make sure that you can find, but that should do the trick there. Alright guys, and that's pretty much it. I have about a 10-second fix that I'd like to show you in the code just from the last episode because I forgot to do it. When we finally came up with our finalized inventory logic, we had on the default item, we have an isEquipped boolean now, and I took it out of the f_inventory item struct, so there's no isEquipped in here. Because of that, make sure that you remove the line in add to inventory with isEquipped, because I was setting that by default in this function, and I can't actually set it in here off of the f_inventory item structure. So I was getting a small error for having that line in there. So feel free to remove that to fix that error if you run into it the next time you try and build your code. But other than that, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you're excited about all the things we can do with the Minimap. If you are, please subscribe. It gives me a lot of support and helps me out more than you know. I also would love to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys so much for everything that you do and for continuing to support me and believe in me. I really appreciate it. I love these series, and I'm always glad to be able to bring them out to you. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of the episodes in the series, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description. I'll be happy to help you out. It's completely free. And yeah, it'd be fun for you to see in the community. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.